Good morning, everyone. Requesting everyone to kindly be seated. Today, we will be having a very interesting discussion. We'll be talking about India's presidency of G20 and the way forward. India has assumed the leadership of the G20 at a very turbulent time with lots of things unfolding in the political, economic realm. While the G20, primarily looks at issues of economics and finance, the whole unsettlement in the international political system definitely has ramifications for important groupings like G20. So in order to understand that, we will have Mr. Amitabh Kant to speak to us, to discuss with us. But before that, I would like to first request Professor C. Rajkumar, the founding Vice Chancellor of our university, OP Jindal Global University, to deliver the welcome address.
A very good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to this very important inauguration that we are having today. Although we launched officially the Jindal Global Center for G20 Studies as a part of this university, a multidisciplinary center that will encompass all the 12 schools of the university. There are very few centers and institutes in this university which are beyond a single school and a particular discipline. This center is one such center. I will have Mohan talk a bit more about the center itself. So this inauguration has been waiting for a while because we wanted none other than our distinguished chief guest for today's program, Mr. Amitabh Kant, who is the G20 Sherpa. But that's, of course, the current position he is holding. But Mr. Kant belongs to that outstanding group of Indian civil servants who have made transformative contributions to the development of India. In his earlier avatars, he has done numerous things which had resulted in significant and impactful public policy reforms as well as transformative change in society. One such thing is something that is very dear to me. As some of you know, I am from a place called Kanyakumari, the southernmost tip of India. And Mr. Amitabh Kant essentially led the transformation of the state of Kerala, where today the entire evolution of Kerala as God's own country and the growth and development of tourism in Kerala, and in that context India, was essentially led by Mr. Amitabh Kant when he was the tourism secretary to the government of Kerala. Of course, I know that today is also Malayalam New Year's Day as well, so I want to wish all our students and faculty members and others on that special occasion. And it augurs well for us to have none other than Mr. Amitabh Kant, who was the architect of that development for India. Of course, since then he has made numerous other contributions, including the contribution in the form of establishment and evolution of the Niti Aayog in its early origins, and then now he's ordained with another big responsibility as India assumed the presidency of G20. He has been a great ambassador of our own institution. Although it's the first time he's physically in our campus, he has spoken at our events, including at one of our convocations online during the pandemic itself. I want to take this moment to tell Mr. Amitabh Kant, and as well as several of you, I know that there are people from the broader town of Sonipat who are present here. This university was founded as a philanthropic initiative of our founding chancellor, benefactor, Mr. Naveen Jindal. I had the privilege to meet him in the year 2006 and spent a year persuading him to do three things. One, to make a substantial financial commitment. Second, to do it in a not-for-profit manner. And third, to let me have the academic freedom, autonomy, and independence. Not only Mr. Jindal made a commitment towards building the university, but he kept his promise to ensure academic freedom and autonomy and independence. For all those students who are here from 45 countries in the world, for all those 1,000 plus faculty members who come from 49 countries in the world, I want you to do a thought experiment now. Just think about a moment. Barely, say, 5 years ago, the students, a decade ago, the faculty, and ask for a moment, if 5 years ago, or say 10 years ago, if somebody had told you that 5 years later, you will be a student in a university which is located in Sonipat, Jagdishpur village in the state of Haryana, and you will be spending good part of your life as an academic in this place, you simply wouldn't have believed it. That is exactly what has happened to our community and this place. This is actually an example of what the future is. As we look at the future, the extraordinary demographic opportunity that India has, as we have 900 million people who are less than 35 years of age. The life expectancy at the dawn of Indian independence was 35 and now it is 72. This essentially means that when most of the Western world will become older, when most of Eastern world, including China and Japan, will become older, India will be younger and will be younger for a longer time. Young Indians will be shaping the future of India and the world. I am not less than 35. Mr. Amitabh Kant is also not less than 35. None of us sitting here are less than 35. But all of you are, and you will be shaping the future of India that we are going to build. And that means you will be in a position to shape the future not only for India, but for the world at large. For that to happen, we need to have transformative institutions that are able to contribute to that new educational imagination. The national education policy essentially is a futuristic effort for which India can play a leadership role. What India is doing currently as the president of G20 is another example of what we can do towards advancement of the cause of global leadership. At OP Jindal Global University, when we decided to set up the Jindal Global Center for G20 Studies, our vision was to go beyond India's presidency. This will be a permanent center located at OP Jindal Global University to be able to engage in research, knowledge creation, thought leadership, including hosting seminars, conferences, lectures, and workshops on a variety of issues concerning G20, not just limiting to the current agenda of the G20 presidency. In fact, we identified 5 important agenda points for this year's activity as we established the center. First, to have a global conference of universities from G20 with representation of several universities from each G20 partner country. I am happy to report that from 27th March to 31st March, we hosted the World University Summit and the G20 Higher Education Forum, in which we had 100 universities from all G20 countries. It was inaugurated by the Minister of State for External Affairs, and valedictorian was held by the Minister of State for Education. As a part of that exercise, the second event and initiative that we are promoting is to organize a G20 Ambassadors Conclave that will promote a dialogue on the future of diplomacy. On 17th, we are hosting a subset of that event in partnership with Asia Foundation. Third, to host a Global Justice Colloquium with a focus on bringing lawyers and judges of the G20 countries to discuss and debate on the state of justice systems across G20 countries. Fourth, to host the World Sustainability Forum for bringing together thought leaders and institutions in G20 to engage on issues surrounding environment and climate change. And fifth, to host the Global Policy and Development Dialogue for bringing together policymakers and academics in G20 to discuss about issues confronting the world of policy and development. These 5 are this year's agenda as India holds the presidency of G20. I am deeply grateful to the Jindal School of International Affairs, including its Dean, Professor Sriram Chawliya, who is not able to be present here as he's traveling, for his leadership for the School of International Affairs. I am, of course, deeply grateful to Professor Mohan Kumar, Professor of Diplomatic Practice at the Jindal School of International Affairs and Dean of the Office of International Relations and International Initiatives, who is also the founding director of the Jindal Global Center for G20 Studies. I'm also deeply grateful to the colleagues and faculty members of the Jindal School of International Affairs, including Sri Parna, as well as the Executive Dean, Professor Ravi Thapar, and all others for being part of this conversation. I deeply appreciate the efforts of the Office of the JSIA, especially Lalit and other colleagues, to ensure that we have a successful event that we're hosting today. I also want to appreciate all the students here who are present. I know that We are in the weekend. You could have left on Friday evening to go back and do whatever, but you have chosen to be here and to be part of what I consider a historic moment when we are inaugurating something new, an opportunity to make a difference, an opportunity to seek change, an opportunity to be part of a transformation. That's exactly what the Jindal Global Center for G20 Studies is expected to do, and we have no better person than Mr. Amitabh Kant, who is not only a thought leader, but a public intellectual in so many ways, besides being a distinguished civil servant, to lead this effort and to help us understand and navigate what this holds for India and the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rajkumar, for the wonderful welcome address. I would now like to request Professor Ravi Thapar to come and introduce the Jindal School of International Affairs.
Very distinguished chief guest, Mr. Amitabh Kant, talented and versatile and inspiration for all of us in the civil service. Very welcome to you, sir. Professor Rajkumar, founding Vice Chancellor of the University, Dr. Sridhar Patnaik, the Registrar, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, my former colleague from the Foreign Service, and Dr. Sriparna Pathak, very distinguished members of the faculty, students who are here. Indeed, it's a very, very significant and momentous occasion for us in the School of International Affairs to have such a distinguished lecture by an intellectual and now a diplomat from the G20, our representative to the G20 Secretariat. Before I get into the statistics and the routine figures about the School of International Affairs, I'd just like to mention what I often say in my class, challenges faced by the Global South, that we in the South, developing world today, are indeed passing through a very, very critical moment. As we all know, the COVID took a toll and made a dent of about $14 trillion in the global GDP. According to the World Inequality Lab, Paris, about 1% of the world's richest population is walking away with 38% of the world's wealth, while 58%, the bottom 50% of the global population is just about to get 2% of the wealth of the world. We have a situation where the global warming is soon going to reach a stage when we're going to hit 2 degrees Celsius more than the pre-industrial levels. $100 billion, which was promised to us in the UN FCC talks, has still to be operationalized. In that world of inequality, in that digital divide, in that technological divide, it becomes very, very important for the South to start asserting its voice. And if I may remind everybody here, this learned assembly, the G20 happens to be one of the most influential groupings to do that. Because the North and the South, the leaders of the North and the leaders of the South are going to be assembled and try and solve the world's problems. And that actually is the guiding vision of the G20. More importantly, for us in the JSIA, I think it reminds us of what lies ahead. If I may mention, these international perspectives are the guiding principles of the School of International Affairs. To equip, fortify, and empower our student population with a vision which will help them to deal with, engage with a society which is increasingly globalized, with a world which is now digital, where every individual is now actually making foreign policy, because you have foreign policy unfolding on your mobiles. Globalization has connected all of us. The world is interdependent. The world is interconnected. The economies are interconnected. In such a world, it's very, very important, therefore, not only to focus on domestic issues, but also to keep an international perspective. And that's why the School of International Affairs, I feel as a former practitioner in diplomacy, becomes a very, very important institution for guiding our student population. And if India has to emerge as a global leader, now at this point we are a leader of the South, but if we are going to join the North, then it becomes extremely important for us to understand these nuances. I'm very happy to report to you, sir, that the JSIA is in fact moving on these lines. We were founded in 2011. We have about 585 students, including 171 who are from 42 countries on the online course, which we are running on the Masters of Arts in International Affairs and Security Studies with Coursera. We have students from 21 states in India. We have faculty which have got, we have 35 members of the faculty from India, 9 from foreign countries. We have university collaborations with 25 foreign universities, such as those in the US, UK, Canada, Australia, Chile, Costa Rica, and various other countries. We have dual degree programs with the University of Leeds, UK, Geneva School of Diplomacy, Queen Mary University, University of California, Berkeley, University College at Western University, Canada, etc., etc. Our students are finding placements in almost 78 leading domestic and foreign organizations and entities, including at CSRN at London, London Polytech at London, HOSINT in Belgium, International Institute of Counterterrorism Israel, McKinsey's KPMG, Amnesty International, and some other distinguished institutions, including those in the government like Niti Yog, ICCR, and the Indian Council of World Relations, World Affairs. With this kind of perspective, we are trying to also engage in research. Our main clusters of study and focus are on Global South Studies, again, which is of great relevance for the G20, Human Rights and International Development, Defense Studies and National Security Studies, Economics and Foreign Policy, Peace and Conflict Studies. To advance in these areas, the JSIA is also running research centers which are led by the faculty and also partnered in by the students. These include the Center for New South Asia, Center for African, Latin American, Caribbean Studies, Center for Security Studies, Center for Intelligence Research, Analysis, etc., etc. In short, therefore, I'm very happy to report to this learned assembly that the G20, which is happening later this year, will be a very inspiring and a very useful occasion for these students in the JSIA to equip themselves with a new vision of how to connect India with the big wide world out there. The problems which we are facing, the erosion of the multilateralism, the dilution of the UN Security Council processes, the war and conflict in East Europe, the pandemic, the equality, gross inequality which is prevailing out there, the climate change and global challenges, all these are issues which will be relevant for the North and the South. So we are very happy to welcome our chief guest, who I'm sure will be sharing some wonderful insights which will further guide us and inspire us in this challenge of how to make India connected in a more empowered and more fortuitous manner. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Ravi Thapar. It's always wonderful listening to you. We now move on to the introduction of the Jindal Global Center for G20 Studies. And I would now request the founding director, Professor Dr. Mohan Kumar, to kindly take the stage.
Good morning, everybody. Mr. Amitabh Kant, G20 Sherpa, the founding Vice Chancellor of OP Jindal Global University, Professor C. Rajkumar, the Registrar, Sridhar Garu, my colleague Ravi Thapar, my colleague Sriparna, and of course, dear students. We all have weight of our names. If you have a name like engineer, or you have a name like furniture wala, then that name tends to create pressure as well. I want to begin by saying, can you just imagine where I'm going with this? Amitabh Kant. Amitabh, of course, is a name that is known to everybody, Bollywood idol and so on. But I'm going to focus on the next name, which is really, in this case, Kant. But really, most of you have learnt or heard of the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. And so it is really an honor and a pleasure to welcome somebody like Amitabh Kant, not just because of the name that he has lived up. I don't know how many of you know Incredible India? Well, you're looking at the author right here. He is the person who coined this expression, and this has stood the test of times. It's a bit like, Air India giving up Maharaja and going completely broke. I wish we never give up Incredible India, because that has served us so well. And he was the man who coined this slogan. We were chatting in the car, and I've come to the conclusion much belatedly, which he has come to much earlier. It is individuals who make a difference. Now, he was telling me and the Vice Chancellor that when he was made Secretary of Tourism in the government of Kerala, it was not exactly a sought-after post, actually. And then he turned it around. At the time, not many people knew of Kerala. And then he goes on to make Kerala an absolutely sought-after destination, the backwaters, Kumarakom, and the rest of it. So I think what all of you need to remember, and that's my first message, if you're looking and Googling Mr. Amitabh Kant, look at what he has done, and you will get the feeling that as individuals, you can make a difference. It's not so much working for a big organization. That brings me to the Vice Chancellor, and those of you who know him, I have now known him for 6 years. There's only one description that fits him. He's just a force of nature. There is no other way to describe him. He called me one fine morning and says, we are thinking of this G20 center, and my initial reaction was, crap, why didn't I think of it? Because he beat me to it. So we should have thought of this. I should have thought of it, but he thinks of it. And then I was so lucky to be made the inaugural director. So I want to again emphasize what he has done for the university. And my main message to you is, no matter what you do, no matter which profession you are, as individuals, you can make a difference to the society. And when you leave this university, if you have learned that and you have develop the conviction and the confidence that you can do this, I think this education would have served you very, very well. About the G20 Center itself, I don't want to stand between you and the chief guest. The Vice Chancellor has mentioned the 5 points, so I will not repeat it, but I want to talk about 2 things which we are doing very concretely. One, I started by asking the deans of the schools that we've got 5 priorities of the Indian presidency, which the chief guest will talk about. Their multilateralism, climate change, voice of the global south, inclusive economic growth, and the rest of it. So I have requested the schools and the deans to really come up with solid monographs on the subject, which I hope to present to Mr. Amitabh Kant at a suitable date. We've also got 40 students who are now working on all the G20 countries, 2 students each. And I was chatting with Mr. Amitabh Kant, and he has very kindly said, time permitting, the students can go and make this presentation to him at the G20 Secretariat in Delhi. I don't think you guys will get ever a better opportunity than doing this. And so please work hard. The university's reputation is at stake. I dare say my reputation is at stake as well. So I wanted to tell the 40 students we have chosen that please start looking at each one of the G20 countries and what these countries approach by way of policy towards G20. India has done something remarkable, and the chief guest will talk about it, how we had the Voice of the Global South Summit, when we had something like 120 leaders come over, talk virtually, not come over, but talk virtually to the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister and others, so that we have an idea about what the Voice of the Global South wants. So I want to conclude by saying, matter of great pleasure and honor that we couldn't have got anybody better, as the Vice Chancellor said. It's great that he has also chosen this occasion to make it his first visit to the university. I hope he is suitably impressed by what he saw, and I want to assure him that we will now take this forward as a permanent center for G20 studies, so that not just analyzing what India does, but also what Brazil and South Africa will do, because those are the two countries which are going to assume the G20 leadership after India. So with those words, Mr. Amitabh Kant, thank you so much for making it. Thank you, Vice Chancellor, for this opportunity to have a center head by somebody like me. I can only assure you that with the students and others, we will make it a grand success. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. I earlier also knew why you have such a huge fan following at JSI and in JGU, but your speech about the Center for Global for the Global Center for G20 Studies just makes it more clearer. And with that, now we'll move on to the distinguished public lecture. I request Mr. Amitabh Kant to kindly come here and speak to the students. Thank you.
The distinguished founding Vice Chancellor, Professor Rajkumar, my very distinguished friend and colleague, Ambassador and Professor Mr. Mohan Kumar, Professor Pathak, Professor Ravi Thapa, Professor Shriparna Pathak, distinguished faculty members and all the young students who've assembled here today. I'm truly delighted to be in the Popi Jindal University. It's really fascinating to visit the campus and to take a guided tour from the Vice Chancellor of the campus, and I must say that all of you are very fortunate to be here. I've studied in Delhi at the St. Stephen's College and the Delhi University, and I can say that your campus is about 100x better than Delhi University and St. Stephen's College. So all of you are really, really fortunate to be in such a wonderful campus. I think this is a great institution, a great learning institution. It's grown very rapidly. Got 12 different institutions, one after another. To be able to grow so rapidly, so fast, with such good infrastructure in such a short while is a great tribute to both Mr. Naveen Jindal and to the dynamism and to the big vision of Mr. Rajkumar, Professor Rajkumar. Because I have no doubt in my mind that OP Jindal University will emerge as not merely India's topmost university, but will be one of the finest universities in the world in the days to come. It's already amongst the only two in the international rankings. It's done very well. It's done very well. And international rankings are very critical because everything gets correlated in the academic world to international rankings. But I'm quite sure from the position at which your law school and other schools are, they will continue to grow and rise and become some of the finest institutions in the world in the days to come. Let me also compliment both Professor Rajkumar and Professor Mohan Kumar for their vision to establish a Center for G20 Studies. G20 is important because it comprises of about 85% of the global GDP. It accounts for almost 78% of the global trade. It accounts for 90% of the patents in the world. It accounts for almost 2/3 of the global population. But it's important to understand that G20 presidency moves year by year from one country to another. There's no permanent secretariat. And because there's no permanent secretariat, different countries have different perspectives when they become leaders. And they drive it in different manners and they have different priorities. And it's very important to study, analyze, and examine this. Because G20 is essentially an economic grouping. It's a grouping for development, for economic growth, for progress. What were the issues which shaped the priorities of that particular country during that particular year is very critical to understand. And how did that country perform during that period? And how was it able to transform many of the challenges that were facing the global community at that point of time? It's important to study and analyze this. The only other university which does this is the University of Toronto, where 2 professors took it upon themselves to do this. And therefore, I'm really truly delighted that the O.P. Jindal University has decided to launch the Center for G20 Studies. It'll bring in a lot of academic rigor, it'll bring in a lot of in-depth studies, and it'll really challenge many of you young students to study this. And we in the G20 Secretariat will be very happy to fall back on your studies, give you the opportunity to make to us presentation, and we'll be very, very happy to get you associated with the G20 meetings held in different parts of India. So ladies and gentlemen, let me first say that we are meeting at a point of time when we are going through a period of great upheaval. This is a period of great turbulence across the world. It is important to understand that the post-COVID era has seen almost 200 million people go below the poverty line. Almost 100 million people have lost their jobs, and actually the huge amount of work on poverty alleviation that had been done in the last 2 decades has all been wiped out in the last 3 years on account of COVID and on account of inflation. And therefore, there's a huge challenge of the post-COVID era. There's a challenge of almost one third of the world being impacted today by recession. And therefore, vast number of countries of the global south are impacted by recessionary trends. There's a challenge of almost 75 countries in the world facing a global debt crisis. And on top of all this, there's a huge challenge of climate action and climate finance. That is, the earth may survive, but we as human beings will go extinct if we are not able to live up to 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2050. And therefore, each one of us has to be an agent of huge climate action and climate finance. And this will be a huge challenge for the world. And then we've seen a geopolitical crisis in Europe right now, a war which is waging on for over a year. This is the only war which is waged on for such a long time in the post-World War II era. And therefore, this is a major crisis. And this has led to food, fuel, and fertilizer getting impacted in various parts of the world. And in addition to all this, you've seen a new crisis emerging, a financial crisis of the Silicon Valley Bank collapsing in the United States of America and the cascading impacts that it can have in other parts of the world. So these are the challenges before the world. Huge number of challenges. Vast number of challenges. And therefore, when G20 is held in India, it's important to understand that it's a meeting of the top 20 countries of the world, plus 9 other invited countries, plus all the international organizations. That's the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the WHO, everyone who's involved in shaping the global architecture is involved with the G20. So when we have the leaders meeting on September 9th and 10th in Delhi, there'll be 43 leaders from across the world. 43, it'll be the biggest gathering of leaders across in Delhi at that point of time. So when leaders meet, they have to discuss the challenges facing the global community, the challenges facing the citizens of the world. And therefore, this is a very major priority for India. What do we take forward to transform the world when India has taken over the leadership of the G20? So ladies and gentlemen, when a G20 is held in any country, there are, to my mind, 3 different parameters which determine the success of a presidency. The first and foremost, to my mind, is the political narrative which the country puts out. And the political narrative is important. The second is the priorities that we are putting out to shape the world, which I'll dwell on a little bit. And the third is, how well do we execute this presidency on ground? That is, you're going to have about 215 meetings, and how well we are going to execute the presidency on ground. G20 is very different from doing a World Cup cricket match or a World Cup football match, which are held for 12 days or 15 days. So you can do a concentrated execution in 12 days, like the World Cup football in Qatar. But G20 presidency starts on the 1st of December and is executed through the year till the 1st of December. Till the next 1st of December, that means 12 months of work around the year. And therefore, it becomes very critical that the execution on ground, along with the content, is top class. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me first dwell on the political narrative. That is India's political narrative as far as the G20 is concerned. That is, India is hosting it. We are a democracy. We have elected, when G20 is held in India, the real host is the Prime Minister of India. And therefore, the G20 leadership is driven by the Prime Minister of India, which is Mr. Narendra Modi, and therefore the world looks at him as someone who's got elected democratically for the second time in India, which is very rare in today's phenomena, and whose credit rating in terms of people's acceptance is still very high at 71%. And therefore, how is he viewed as a global leader is very important. But more important than that is the kind of development India has done. And it's important to understand this because in the last few years, India has done a huge amount of digital transformation. All of you have a digital identity. All of you have a bank account. The bank account is linked to your digital identity, that is your Aadhaar and also your mobile. And all of you must be doing all digital payments. So India today does about 11x more payments than what United States and Europe do together. We do more than 4x payment of what China does. We do about 42% of the real-time payments in the world. And therefore, it's important to understand that in the last 7-8 years, India has done a huge amount of digital transformation, a massive amount of digital transformation. And this has been noticed around the world. The other is that in the last few years, we built a huge amount of infrastructure on ground. We've been able to provide 30 million houses to Indian citizens, which is like providing a house to every single Australian. 30 million Indians means that's the size of the population of Australia. So we've been able to provide a house to every single citizen of Australia. We've been able to provide about 110 million toilets. 110 million toilets to the citizens of India, which is like providing a toilet to every single citizen of Germany. And we've been able to provide piped water connection to 243 million households. 243 million households is like providing a water connection to every single individual in Brazil. We've also built about 55,000 kilometers of road. 55,000 kilometers of road means that we've done about 1.5 times the diameter of the earth. We've constructed road equivalent to that. So that has been the development narrative of India. And in addition to this, during the COVID period, we provided 2.2 billion vaccinations to our citizens, which is all digital, which is all paperless, cashless COVID vaccinations to the citizens of India, whereas other countries were struggling with paperwork. So what India has done is really done a huge amount of digital transformation, infrastructure transformation. And as a recent study by the Bank of International Settlement, BIS, has said that India has achieved in the last 8 years what India would normally have taken 50 years to achieve. So what we've done in 8 years is what would have taken 50 years to achieve, simply because we did a huge amount of digital infrastructure transformation, a huge amount of infrastructure growth that we've built up in the last few years. So this political narrative and the development narrative of India is important. The second is, what are our priorities for G20? And it's important to dwell a little bit on them. First and foremost, at a time when the world is facing huge recessionary trends across the world, and 1/3 of the world is facing a massive recession in the global south, it's important that we talk about inclusive, resilient, sustainable growth, Because without growth, we'll not be able to lift people above poverty line, we'll not be able to provide them education and health, and therefore resilient growth, sustainable growth, and growth alone will impact the citizens of the world, and growth alone will have a huge impact on the lives of citizens in the global south is very critical. So first and foremost, how does India work with the rest of the world to drive inclusive, resilient, and sustainable growth? The second, which is very important, is that the COVID era, as I said, has seen vast number of people, 200 million people going below the poverty line. We are at the midway point of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. The 2030 was the point of which every country had accepted that we'll be able to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. Because of COVID, instead of progressing, we have regressed. Instead of progressing, we have regressed. The world has regressed, and a vast segment of population has got impacted on learning outcomes, on health outcomes, and therefore the world needs to craft out a totally new SDG action plan to lift people above the poverty line. So all the sustainable goals have got impacted because of COVID and inflation, and therefore a completely new action plan, a new vision of how to transform the lives of citizens across the world has to be spelled out. And that is what a new goal, a new sustainable development goal action plan needs to be spelled out. Thirdly is the challenge of climate action and climate finance. We in India are not responsible for carbonizing the world. The developed world, when they were industrializing, have carbonized the world. They've occupied 88% of the total carbon space available. Out of the 2,800 gigatons of carbon space available at 1.5 degrees centigrade, we've occupied very little, just 52 gigatons, which is 1.5% of the total carbon space available. Very little, whereas we are logically entitled to about 17.5% on the basis of our per capita income. But irrespective of that, India will become, as we industrialize in the years to come, we'll become the third biggest polluters in the world. And therefore, India must become the first country in the world to industrialize without carbonizing the world. And therefore, it's a challenge for each one of us to actually shape the world and shape the future of India. Even if we do 100% renewable, the electricity component is just 20% of the energy. And therefore, we need to decarbonize many of the hard-to-abate sectors like refinery, like steel, cement, long-distance transportation, fertilizer. And this would require a huge amount of new technology in terms of green hydrogen. It will require long-term financing. And all this climate action is what Prime Minister has talked about in his Panch Amrit at Glasgow, that India wants to lead the world in climate action, in climate finance. It lead the world through a new way of life, what he terms as the lifestyle for sustainability, life. That is nudging people into behavioral change, nudging people into ensuring that tube lights are switched off, nudging people into ensuring that we live in another era where we are able to close our taps, cycle to work, do new forms of urbanization which are not carbon intensive. That is what life is about. But as we shape the future of the world through climate action, it's important that countries, emerging countries like India and the developing countries of the South, which are most vulnerable to climate action, are also able to get long-term financing of 30 years at low rates of interest. The developed world, which has accounted for most of the carbonization in the world, had in 2009 at Copenhagen committed to providing $100 billion a year. $100 billion a year to which they have not lived up to. But irrespective of that, there's a lot of private capital available. But for private capital to flow in to emerging markets, it's important to understand that the risks of Asia and the risk of Africa are very different from the risk of the developed world. The developed world gets money at 2% rate of interest. In India, we get money at 8% rate of interest. Africa, you get money at 16% rate of interest. In sub-Saharan countries, you get money at 22% rate of interest. And therefore, India is not able to access long-term finance at 8% rate of interest, and therefore risks of India need to be de-risked along with other parts of the world. And therefore, institutions like World Bank and International Monetary Fund, they are very critical institutions which need to provide long-term lending based on blended finance, credit enhancement, what is now known as first loss guarantees to enable resources to flow into many of these emerging markets. But World Bank and IMF were designed in post-World War II. They are Bretton Woods institutions which are not designed for either sustainable development goals or for financing climate action. So it's important that these institutions are reshaped, they are restructured for the world of today, which is facing challenges of sustainable development goals and of climate action. And that is one of India's key priorities. That is, how do you reshape a new world of today where you have to transform the lives of citizens and you need to transform the lives of climate action based on climate action through these multilateral financial institutions, and how do you get the global south out of debt. And that is why when we started off our G20 presidency, one of the first few things the Prime Minister did was to interact with 122 countries of the global south and get their inputs so that their inputs could form a very major component of our own priorities. And one of the things that very clearly came out is that the multilateral financial institutions of the post-World War II period have not had a major impact on the lives of citizens in any of these developing countries of the South based on their experiences. And therefore, our focus would be on how to reconfigure, restructure, redesign these multilateral financial institutions. And then the next priority is about digital transformation and about digital public infrastructure which India has built up. Our belief is, based on our own experience, that if you want to transform lives of citizens, digital transformation will be very critical, as India has demonstrated. In India itself, we've been able to provide, during the COVID period, 800 million people money straight into their bank accounts. And not a single paisa of leakage. When I was growing up as a young officer in Kerala, money used to be transferred from the central government to the state government to the districts, and almost 80 to 85% there used to be leakage. Very little money used to reach the actual beneficiary. But today you can put money straight into the bank accounts and actually the beneficiary is able to get money without any leakages. So what we've been able to build with digital identity, with opening of bank accounts and by linking Aadhaar and mobile number to this bank account, has been truly transformational. When I was again a young officer, one of my jobs was to transform the lives of traditional fishermen in Kerala. And I worked for about 3.5, 4 years on this, making self-help groups of fishermen and fisherwomen. And we were able to provide them new technology. We gave them outboard motors, we gave them new crafts, fiberglass crafts, they could go much further into the sea. We gave them new fishing nets, which were then known as the disco nets. But the biggest challenge was that the fishermen were prone to drinking, and what they would earn in one day, they would drink the same night, and they would not have anything left for a day when they could not go to fish because of rains or monsoons. And therefore it was very important to open their bank accounts. Opening their bank accounts, know your customer, was a nightmare. It used to take me 8-9 months chasing bank managers, physical bank managers, to open their bank accounts. Today in India, you open a bank account in less than a minute using your biometric. So I've seen this transformation from 9 months to less than a minute in opening bank accounts for beneficiary. And therefore, when Jio started giving mobiles to many of you people, it acquired actually, it got 220 million customers. 220 million customers in less than 100 days. 220 million in less than 100 days, because the cost of acquisition due to digital technology had fallen to less than $1 as compared to $28 before this digital identity had been built up. In Europe and America today, it costs almost about $150 to acquire a customer. In India, it has fallen to less than $1. So what India has done is to do innovation at population scale and spread this out, and at low cost. At low cost, we've been able to bring in huge innovation across the country. And therefore, this digital transformation is something which will drive the growth of India for the next 3 decades. All our innovations are open source, open APIs, they are interoperable, so everybody can innovate on top of them. And that is the model which has been built up. So if you look at the last 2 decades, a lot of innovation has happened in the world. But all this innovation has happened because of big tech. It's happened because of Google, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and in the case of China by Alibaba and by Tencent. So big tech, but they could innovate because they took your data. They took all data of individual citizens and used that for AI and machine learnings and did that. In the case of Europe, they followed another model which is called the GDPR. They said we'll ensure the safety of data for citizens, but in the process, they killed privacy. And therefore, you've not seen many innovations emerging from Europe in the last 2 decades. India has done something very different. India built the railway tracks, the public track on which we've allowed private sector to innovate. So India is the only country where PhonePe competes with Google Pay, Paytm competes with WhatsApp, all in the marketplace. So you have 40 different apps competing with each other in the market space, and all of you are using them for payments today. And at the click of a button, you are able to buy anything digitally and get them. And therefore, what India has done through CoWIN, through DigiLocker, where all your records are maintained, through UPI, through FASTags, is something very unique, very innovative. And what we are doing in education through Diksha and Swayam is very, very innovative. It's path-breaking. It's actually transformational for the rest of the world in the days to come. And therefore, India's model is unique, and we think that there is a huge India story to the digital transformation through which we can transform, we can help other countries to transform the world. It's important because if you look around the world, there are 4 billion people who do not have a digital identity. There are 2 billion people who do not even have a bank account. There are 133 countries in the world who do not have a fast payment mechanism. They are not fortunate like many of you studying here who can actually buy digitally, because these countries do not have a digital fast payment mechanism. Their citizens do not have a digital identity. So much of what India has done to transform itself can be taken to other parts of the global south and really help to transform the lives of citizens there. And lastly, our next priority is about women-led development. And women-led development is important because in India today, the latest NFHS survey shows that there are more women than men in India, 1,022 women to 1,000 men. And our belief is that it will be impossible for India to grow at rapid pace of 8 to 9, 10% year after year for 3 decades without women being a very major contributor to the economic growth and development of India. And across the world, it will be very different, but difficult across Africa, across sub-Saharan Africa, all these countries, without women being put into positions of eminence, without improving their learning outcomes, without improving their health outcomes, and without focusing on this virtuous cycle of malnutrition where the mothers, the children, and we have a lot of stunted children in India simply because we are not able to provide good nutrition. And therefore, this whole cycle of women driving growth and progress and development is very, very critical. According to the World Economic Forum, it will take 132 years to bring parity between men and women. Our view is that we should be able to do this in one generation. Transform this. How to do this is something which G20 will take it forward, putting a greater amount of leadership, greater amount of wealth, putting huge amount of resources into women to become leaders of tomorrow to drive the world is very critical. And therefore, women-led development is a major priority. And the last point I want to make is about how do you conduct a G20. So as I said, cricket matches are held for a concentrated period of 12 days, as many of you are watching the T20 matches. Many of you would have seen World Cup football, Qatar, few days, but G20 presidency is for a year. In most countries, G20 meetings are held in the capital city or another city, so 2 cities at the maximum. In India's case, the Prime Minister said that we'll do G20 as a people's presidency, as a Jan Bhagidari, and we'll take it out to different states of India. So we are holding G20 meetings, about 215 meetings in over all the states of union territories of India. So every single state of India, every single union territory of India, and in over 60 cities of India. So we are viewing this as an opportunity to really transform these cities in terms of their infrastructure, their drainage, their solid waste, their roads, so we've done meetings across Udaipur, where the Fatehpur Lake was transformed, the roads were transformed, Udaipur as a city was transformed, Kumaragam backwaters were transformed, Aurangabad, Pune, Mumbai, many of these cities have been transformed because we are holding G20 presidency there. And this has been a great example of cooperative federalism, of working with the states. The other big opportunity has been to use the states to push their culture and to push their soft power and actually push the brand of the states into the global markets. And therefore the states have put their best cultural art forms out. They've used this opportunity to promote their handloom, their handicrafts, and to promote their one district, one product, all this. And therefore we worked in partnership with all the states, almost 60 cities of India, to promote and market G20. We've also used this opportunity to promote millets in a very big way, because we feel that they are far more, they have iron, they have protein, they have a huge amount of calcium, and they're far more, we need to move away from water consuming crops like water and rice and wheat to millets, which are extremely rich in good protein content, and therefore every single meal that we serve, we've used millets in a very big way. So ladies and gentlemen, I've dwelt on the broad perspective of what's happening across the world. I've given you a perspective of the political and development narrative of India. I've given you a perspective of what our priorities are in terms of trying to reshape and reconfigure the world. I've given you a perspective of what how India is planning to execute, and we've already executed about 100 meetings. So close to about 100 meetings have already been done, and another 115 meetings to follow in the next couple of months before we hold our meeting, our leaders summit on September 9th and 10th. Now the work that has been done requires a lot of intellectual backing in terms of getting a lot of experts, huge number of consultants to bring out issue notes, which are then sent out across the world. People respond to that, different countries respond to that, we get their perspective, and finally a leader's communique comes out. A leader's communique is very important because that shows the ambitious, as the Prime Minister said, that India's presidency will be very inclusive, it'll be very decisive, it'll be very ambitious, and it'll be action-oriented. So our objective is really to make it a very action-oriented presidency, which we'll continue to do. There will be challenges of geopolitics during this presidency, but like Bali did last year, Bali had a huge amount of geopolitical conflict throughout its presidency, but eventually the Sherpas, and Sherpa acts like an envoy to the leader, which is the Prime Minister. We were able to figure out how to do this, and we were able to find a final solution because this is an economic grouping, it does not discuss political issues, but the issue of the war is having a huge impact on food, fuel, and fertilizer. That is what the G7 argument is, and in reality it is having a huge impact. But we took the UN General Assembly is the political body. The UN General Assembly and the UN Security Council discuss all political matters. So finally we took the resolution of the UN General Assembly and put it as a part of the G20 preamble so that we could get a consensus around G20. We are very optimistic, we are very hopeful that we'll come out with a very, very inclusive and a very action-oriented communique at the end of this, and we'll make it we'll bring everybody on board and make it consensus-oriented. So I look forward to all of you analyzing, I look forward to all of you studying, I look forward to a lot of you contributing intellectually, and a lot of you writing about the G20 presidency, and we'll be very happy to work in very close collaboration and partnership with all of you. Any help, any assistance, any support that you need, we'll all be there to provide you all support from the G20 presidency. And those of you who do the best work, we'll be very delighted to welcome you to the G20 Secretariat and to probably meet the Sherpas at the next round of meeting in Delhi whenever they are there. So thank you very much. I'm truly delighted to be here, and I'm really fascinated to see this wonderful university and to see the bright, brilliant young faces who are all assembled here today. Thank you very much. Go on to become a great champion of G20. Thank you so much.
All right, this deserves a standing ovation. Come on. I don't need to say this to you. All right, we will have a Q&A session. So thank you so much, Mr. Kant, for that really comprehensive tour de force on not just the G20 aspirations, but the growth and development narrative of India. All right, so the floor is open. There are people will be coming around with the mic for you to ask questions. So please raise your hand and we'll take it from there. All right, there are questions. Oh, there's one here. Let's start from this side, maybe. एक और mic ले जाना. You. I know. I'll give this to him.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Parag Gileda from first year Baka. My question is G20 the perfect opportunity for India to develop its infrastructure? Beg your pardon? It's G20 the perfect opportunity for India to develop its infrastructure?
Let's take a few more questions.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for being here. My question is regarding the communique which was not made jointly in the foreign ministers meeting which happened last month. Sir, since you talked about how we need to peacefully resolve the conflict which is happening in Europe right now, what would be a top priority to make sure that there is some kind of a statement which is forwarded in our later meetings which will happen throughout the G20 presidency of India? Thank you.
More and then, yeah, right behind.
Hello, sir. My name is Ritik and I'm a master's student at JSI. My question to you is, with the G20 as a coordinating forum, and it has certain inherent limitations as not a treaty-based organization, how do you plan to tackle those inherent limitations of the G20, as we've also seen in the finance ministers meeting that happened a month ago?
Thank you. I'll take one more and then we'll have an answer.
Good afternoon, sir. So my question to you is regarding the recent strife between G7 and the OPEC Plus regarding the global oil prices. So do you think such conflicts would impact the unity of G20? And sir, if yes, then how can we resolve such issues? Thank you.
So, first of all, I was asked to give a public lecture and not to, I was never told that I'll be just made to respond to questions. So I'm like, Einstein in many ways. Einstein had given many lectures in United Kingdom. He'd given over 1,000 lectures. And, wherever he used to go, his driver used to go along with him. And then, his driver had heard him over 1,000 times, and then he was invited to the University of Columbia. Nobody had seen Einstein in America, so his driver told Einstein that your lectures are very boring, you're a very good scientist, but you don't know how to deliver, very boring, and I can give a better lecture than you can ever do. So they went to Columbia, and Einstein said, okay, you give the lecture, I'll sit in the audience. So this driver gave a brilliant lecture. It was a fantastic lecture. The vice chancellor, the dean, everybody was sitting. He gave a fantastic lecture. Absolutely superb lecture. Got a standing ovation like I got. Everybody got up, clapped. And then this vice chancellor said, now we have some question answers. And he got the brightest student to ask the toughest question. So this driver says that, young man, your question for today is so simple, so easy that even my driver sitting in the audience can reply. And Einstein got up and replied to that question. So I've given my public lecture. If you have any questions, Mr. Mohan Kumar can reply to them. Yeah. So let me dwell upon few of those issues. First of all, let me first start with one question on this not able to get a consensus, and actually it's important to compare it with what was happening in Indonesia last year. Actually 17 meetings had failed, 17 ministerial meetings had failed, and finally we got a consensus in the last Sherpa meeting which put it all together. So my assessment is nobody wants G20 to fail. Everybody wants G20 the emerging markets want G20 to survive. Russia and China want G20 to survive. Everybody believes in multilateralism. G7 wants G20 to survive. Nobody wants G20 to survive, but there's a war going on, the war is not our creation. World War One was not our creation. World War II is not our creation. The present crisis is not our creation. So we'll do our best. We'll do our best to do everything possible. We'll try and make ourselves as ambitious, as action-oriented. We'll do our best to achieve consensus. If it still eludes us, I don't think the world will ever blame us for it. I think we should all blame Europe for creating this conflict. Don't blame India for doing it. We'll do our best. We are not the cause and consequence of this present crisis of Russia, Ukraine. Whoever has created it should be blamed for it. But we'll do our utmost best to bring everybody around. We are well positioned to do that, and we'll do our very best for it. But I don't think Indians should ever feel guilty about the fact that despite best attempts, we have not created the war, and we are not the cause of that war. So I think we should put that onus squarely on those who have created the war. Secondly, I think on this opportunity for infrastructure, yes, it's a great opportunity. It's the best opportunity to brand our cities, to make these cities some of the best in the world. We've never focused very strongly on urbanization, and therefore the Prime Minister has used this opportunity to really tell the states that they should really clean up these cities. And I think every single state of India has worked in partnership with us. It's been a great partnership. It's been a great partnership with the states. It's a great example of cooperative federalism. We've really been able to do some remarkable work in the states and also help them to promote their art and culture. I mean, I've lived in Kerala for almost about 25 years, but the cultural show they put up with their traditional art forms was just mind-boggling. It was amazing. I learned so much. So going to different cities, I'm learning a lot about Indian art and culture. So huge revival of traditional art forms, huge revival of traditional handloom, huge revival of traditional handicrafts, one district, one product. All this is a huge movement. That is what G20 has done to India. Yeah, so G20 is not a treaty-based organization. I think G20 in the past has, whenever there's been a crisis in 2002, 2008, etc., or the global debt crisis, G20 has acted far more effectively, far more positively than any treaty-based organization. Treaty-based organizations get caught up in a lot of, pardon my saying this, a lot of international law, procedures, processes, rules, regulation. There's nothing better than the getting all the leaders to meet and make them, for them to interact in an informal basis and say that we want to change the world in this manner. And that is what G20 is all about.
All right, let's take another round.
Hello, sir. My name is Yashi Jain, and I'm from the General School of Banking and Finance. So recently, I've been doing this study on the employment rate of India and how the farmers are affected through it. So as the priorities you discussed recently, like right now on this platform, I thought this is the right time to ask this question. Don't you think that G20 summit should also be somewhere related to employment, or somehow the dots should be connected to it? Like in my study, I think employment takes up a lot of stance on India when it's connected to farmers. So I would like to know what's your point on that, and should it be a valid point to ask and consider it in a study? Thank you.
Let's pick up, yeah, okay. Right here.
Good afternoon to all the dignitaries. My name is Pandan Mehta. I'm from the Jindal Global Law School. My question revolves around the foreign policy which we have seen. We have seen a paradigm shift in the foreign policy executed by India. G20 is of course one of the major components of that, but we have seen other avenues also arising, like for example the ASEAN summit, the SCO summit. So how do you go about having common objectives from all of these bodies which India participates in actively now? And how do you go about achieving common objectives which helps the greater development for India in terms of its foreign profile as such? Thank you.
Good one. Right here, on the right side. Oh, you have the mic. Go ahead.
Okay, so Thank you for providing us such an insightful lecture. My name is Shagun Thapliyal. I'm a first-year master's student. So since India is hosting the G20, so I'm curious about the insights of day-to-day workings as the representative. Like you have a routine. Like what responsibilities do you have? Like what are the workings of the secretariat? If we get us some form of insight.
Hello, I'm Abhishek, first year MA student at General School of International Affairs. So, sir, my question was that at the current time, India is associating a lot with G20. My question is, why is India not trying to lobby itself into the G7 group, which is more influential in the global north? And I also want to understand the reason why our Prime Minister focuses so much when he talks about the world and associates us with the global south, considering that India is economically on a different level altogether when it comes to growth and the future projections, and while at the same time the global south is struggling at the moment. So don't you think that we would be benefiting more if we associated ourselves with the global north rather than the global south? Thank you.
So let me, several questions, several strands, and one of which was on employment and so on. So, I'm a great believer in, and I dwelt on that it's important to grow. It's important to have rapid rates of growth. A country like India needs to grow, and it's very important for all of you to understand this. That's very important that India grows at high rates of 9 to 10% per annum, year after year, for 3 decades to remove unemployment. You can't be distributing poverty. First and foremost is, what is the government's focus? The government's focus is that India must grow, accelerate the pace of your growth. Unless you don't grow, and we've grown at those periods for 5 to 6 years. It's not that we've not grown. But India needs to do that for a 3-decade period. And that's what countries like South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and in recent times China have done. They've done that for 3-decade period. So it's very important for India to grow at those very high rates to be able. You can't remove unemployment without growing. So that's very important. Secondly, you must understand, fundamentally must be very clear that in India, unlike rest of the world, in India, the population dependency on agriculture is very high. 42% of your population in agriculture with informal jobs is very high. So the rest of the world has grown by urbanizing. Urbanization has led to quality jobs being created. And if 500 million people are going to get into urbanization in the next 2.5 decades, it's a huge opportunity to create good quality jobs. So manufacturing and urbanization have been the big driver of formal jobs across the world. That's very important to understand. So don't ever lose track of this macro perspective of growth, which is very important. And growth requires you to get into sunshine, very new and absolutely sunrise areas of growth. So India needs to get into new areas of growth. Mobile manufacturing, advanced chemistry cell battery manufacturing, getting into electric vehicles, all these artificial intelligence, all these are new areas of growth which will drive the world. And if you don't look, India doesn't get into those areas, especially when you have the advantage of data in a very big way, India will not be able to grow at rapid rates. It's very important to get into those areas. And secondly, this issue about G7, again the point is, so if you look at the trend, what is happening in the world is that the share of emerging markets is going up, the share of developed markets is coming down. And in the next 2 decades, actually the share of emerging markets will go up in a big way. Now, these bodies of G7 and G20 were made at a particular point of time, for instance, including G20. I mean, there are several countries which logically have, we should understand some of these things. Like Argentina, when G20 was formed, was one of the fastest growing countries, one of the slowest growing countries now. Same with many other countries. But India has grown. We are now the 5th largest country in the world. We'll soon be the 3rd fastest growing economy in the world. And therefore the challenge for India is to keep growing. If you are the fastest growing in the world and you become the 3rd largest economy in the world, everybody will ask you to play a major role. Your national power is, to my mind, a function of your economic power. You derive your political power from your economic power and your economic strength. All these diplomats who do political work actually derive their strength from the economic strength which India has. So if India grows rapidly, and that is why I'm stressing again and again to you people, that you people have to be very clear that India has to grow rapidly at high rates. If you grow rapidly, then forget G20, forget G7, you will be a top voice in the world. Nobody can stop that. Nobody can stop that. And that is really the key to my mind. And that ambition must be there. That burning ambition that India must be the key driver of the global economy must be there. And as about spending a day and what we do at G20, you're most welcome to come and spend a day with us. Yeah.
All right, last round, because we are so far going on time. So in another 5 minutes, I want to wind this up, and then we have a concluding address. So please. Yeah. We're going to take 3 questions. Huh? Oh, you have the mic. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for all the information you shared today. I'm truly privileged to be sitting here. So my question, I'm curious about the current dynamics between India and Russia in G20, especially concerning that we have taken the position of formal neutrality. How are we planning to get closer to Russia economically, and do you think this is a concern for our other relationships? And how do you think this would affect our other relationships? Thank you.
Let's take one more here. Yeah. Right here. Second row.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vibha Harish, and I'm a first-year Global Affairs student. My question is, how can we promote international trade with the Indian rupee?
Okay, all right. There's one person raising the hand for a very long time. Right there. Yeah, please go ahead. Okay, please.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for having here. My question is regarding the function of multilateral financial institution. We have been talking a lot about the concrete reform in the multilateral institution, but there is a scope of small scale changes within those institutions as well. I heard you talking about such changes within the organizational structure of World Bank, which particularly specializes direct lending. And there is a agency within the World Bank named Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, MIGA. So how this agency MIGA could be utilized to promote credit enhancement and blended finance? Thank you.
All right, great. Let's pick up one more here. And that's the last. I know we could go. Yeah, yourself. Oh, there's a mic coming up here.
Hello. Good afternoon to all of the dignitaries. Thank you so much for such a comprehensive address. So my question is less related to India's presidency and more on your own personal views of growth. So yes, it's true that India has invested a lot into renewable energy and that it's one of our primary goals. But economic growth still implies industrialization and urbanization, which still do tend towards destroying the environment in some aspects. So how are we going to balance both the growth of economic growth and sustainable development? Thank you.
So let me start off with the last question first, and that's why I said that India must become the first country in the world to industrialize without carbonizing the world. That is, different eras have different drivers of growth. When the world was growing and expanding from 1930 onwards, you had fossil fuels were driving the world. Today's world can be driven by renewables and it can be driven by green hydrogen. The innovations and technology has ensured that India is climatically blessed. It can do renewables at low cost, at very low cost, use that renewable to crack water, produce green hydrogen at very low cost. India has the potential to be the lowest cost producer and the lowest cost exporter of green hydrogen to the world, to the rest of the world. And that is the opportunity for India, to get the size and scale right. Today, green hydrogen in India costs $4.5 a kilogram. How to bring it down to $2 per kilogram? By 2026, bring it down to $1 per kilogram. It'll make it cheaper than fossil fuel. Today, we import $200 billion worth of fossil fuel. If you are able to use your climatic condition to produce green hydrogen, you will be, what has the Prime Minister said? That by 2047, you should be free from import of fossil fuel. That means use the strength of your renewable to produce green hydrogen, and actually across refineries, across long distance transport, across steel, use green hydrogen. Because 2026, Europe will put border tax on you will not be able to export your steel, you will not be able to export anything to Europe without that. The world is decarbonizing. India must be the first country to do that. If you do that, you will attract value, you will attract capital, you will become the leader of the world in decarbonizing. That is the opportunity for India. What other question? About MEGA, that was a very important question and a very good one. It's a very good one because I am a great believer that MEGA has a very major role to play. It still does very little of lending. If the strength of MEGA is used not merely by World Bank but every other country, it can use the guarantees of MEGA to do 10x more lending than what World Bank does at present. So you can do a huge amount of more lending than what international lending does right now. It can also blend it with private finance and do much more amount of lending, huge amount of lending, and that MEGA can be a very powerful instrument. Yeah, so India, Russia is, we've had, we are great believers in having good relationship with everyone, all G20 countries. You can't be tilted in one side. See, the world is very heavily polarized with G7, Russia, China fully supporting Russia. G20 is about multilateralism. Multilateralism requires the skill to get everybody together. Your ability to draft out a communique which has a G7 on your side, which has Russia, China on your side, which has all the emerging markets on your side. That is really the key to a good leadership of G20. Despite all the conflict, despite all this, our attempt will be to able to bring everybody together as far as the developmental issues are concerned. We should leave aside the war. See, there's a war going on in one part of the world. It is impacting citizens in one part of the world. But the rest of the world, which is 95% of the world, is impacted by global debt, by inflation, by poverty, by learning, impact on learning outcomes and health outcomes. Are you going to take care of 1% of the world, or are you going to take care of the other 95% of the world? So G20 is an economic forum, a development forum. It must take care of the 95% of the world, which is on growth, on poverty, on illiteracy. That is important.
Thank you, Mr. Kant, for patiently taking all the questions and answering in such thorough detail. I'd now like to welcome Professor Dabiru Sridhar Patnaik, the Registrar of our university, to deliver his concluding remarks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sriparna. Before I proceed further with my concluding address, I will request the Vice Chancellor to felicitate our Chief Guest, Mr. Amitabh Kant. Thank you so much. It's indeed a fascinating day today. It's momentous. It is historic for the obvious reason which we are all aware of. India is assuming the G20 presidency, and we are having with us the G20 Sherpa talk to all of us, and in such a short period of time has given a vivid description and analysis of the nature, scope and purpose of G20 and what India ought to do and what, as subjects of this nation, we all are supposed to do. We are so truly grateful to Mr. Amitabh Kant for having taken out his time and to talk to us in detail about the aspects and machinations of G20. And most importantly, as he mentioned throughout the lecture, and in particular at the end of the lecture, with India's commitment to multilateralism, it's only an opportunity for India to contribute to the discussions pertaining to global justice and global governance, and in particular with the confluence of its moral idealism and pragmatism. It's only an opportunity for all the states to understand their functional necessities and contribute to the vision and mission of G20 along with the other objectives as purported by the United Nations. So on this particular occasion and on behalf of the university, I would like to inform our chief guest that we would be truly committed to the priorities of the G20, and we will be fully working on all the aspects as outlined by you, sir, in the lecture, and we will be contributing to the mission of G20. So thank you so much for supporting us, and not only today, but throughout the short but the promising history of the university. Mr. Amitabh Kant has been supporting us, and he has spoken to us and spoken to all our students and faculty at the height of the pandemic when we organized our convocation in a virtual mode, and even preceding the pandemic, even he has been part of our initiatives, whether be it the inception of the Center for India-China Studies or other forums, and always hosted us at the Niti Aayog to guide us and to inspire us. So we are so truly grateful to you, Mr. Amitabh Kant, on this particular occasion. And this is your first visit to the university, and we presume that it's a momentous visit for you as well. I also take this moment to acknowledge the presence of some prominent citizens from Sonipat who graced the occasion, covering various facets of activities in life, be it public affairs, the civil society, media, police and all. We are so grateful to your time, whatever the university is able to do and is able to achieve under the dynamic leadership of the Vice Chancellor and our philanthropist, Mr. Naveen Jindal. It's only because of the stakeholdership model, and that includes not only our students, faculty, and parents and guardians of our students, past and present, but also we owe it to Sonipat, to the district administration, to the leadership of the state. So we are so grateful for your continuous support and for having taken part in this lecture, because this is not just meant for only the members of the university community, but it's a lecture for the greater public good and for the greater public cause as well. And on this particular note, I must make a special mention. It's a Saturday, and I understand that most of our students plan to go back home, but you have taken out time to be here, and we are so grateful to you, and in particular to the efforts driven by Lalit under the guidance of the Dean Sri Ram Chaulia, the Executive Dean Mr. Ravi Thapar, Professor Ravi Thapar, and all the assistant deans, and in particular the efforts of the Dean of International Affairs and Global Initiatives and the director of the newly founded Center of G20 Studies, that is Professor Mohan Kumar. It's a collective effort that made this lecture not only a possibility but a greater success, and in particular we owe a debt of gratitude to the JSIA Student Council and the JGU Wide Student Council as well, because I know that you all had planned for a Bharatnatyam recital today at approximately 11:30 or 12, but last night I had requested you all to reschedule it to the afternoon, and you had kindly agreed to do that. That only shows a lot of your belief and contributions to the purposes of the university. So we are grateful to you, and we are thankful to all the departments that work towards making this program a great success. And now the work begins, and we should focus on the G20 priorities. Thank you so much. The meeting has ended.
Requesting the students to kindly stay inside and be seated till the guest leaves.